Indians are doing it again. And you know what? Many Americans are confused. Many Europeans are confused. Very confused. So the reason is this. The West and its financial institutions were built by loot and slavery. But then can anyone explain how come those who our European ancestors looted, colonized and enslaved can bounce back, rebuild themselves and now have one of the world's largest banks? Want to know who those people are? They are Indians, and this time around, they look unstoppable. On the one hand, this year, two of the largest US banks have collapsed, and on the other hand, history is being written as a bank giant bigger than Morgan Stanley emerges from India. Yes, you heard that right. HDFC Bank's merger with HDFC mortgage lender has created one of the world's most valuable banks after completing a merger, marking a new challenger to the largest American and Chinese lenders occupying the coveted top spots. According to Bloomberg, the new HDFC Bank entity will have around 120 million customers. That's greater than the population of Germany. As reported, HDFC surges ahead of banks including HSBC and Citigroup, and guess what? The bank expects to grow at 18% to 20%. The British newspaper The Economist has also reacted to this massive development. This article explains that it is the fourth biggest banking transaction in the world ever, according to Refinitiv, a data provider. According to HDFC CEO Kaki Mistry, India is set to grow and grow at a very rapid pace. And for that we must compliment our government and the RBI for the role that they have played. On the other hand, it is not difficult to understand why China, where some of the world's most valuable banks have emerged in recent times, often sounds so jealous or insecure because of India's rise. For example, take a look at this article in the Global Times. China should understand that India has chosen its own unique path, and India's rise doesn't necessarily mean China's collapse or destruction. And yes, I want to say this to the Global Times. India is not facing any delusion. But yes, it would be delusional if the Chinese believe that China is invincible. And as far as the Western colonial criminal states are concerned, they shouldn't forget who they actually are. Yes, India is rebuilding itself after it was looted by the West. Yes, India is building its financial institutions with its hard-earned money, but on the other hand, the West's financial institutions were built or profited from colonial loot or slavery. This includes British banks. And of course, American banks. And even the world's biggest bank from America, JP Morgan Chase. Yes, Americans, before you feel proud to see an American bank ahead of everyone else, don't forget that the subsidiaries of your bank, JP Morgan Chase, accepted enslaved people as collateral for loans. And don't you forget that Americans used slaves, human beings who were kidnapped from Africa, as human property to secure loans or pay debts that generated huge amounts of capital for them. And yes, when some of those loans defaulted, the American banks took ownership of those slaves. So yes, Americans and Europeans, do not forget your bank's dirty truth when you see these rankings. And yes, seeing an Indian bank rising in these rankings and challenging the criminal institutions of the colonial criminal states is a refreshing sight for anyone who truly supports decolonization or empowerment of those who were formerly enslaved. Of course, it doesn't mean that Indian banks, Indians or the Indian government have reached a position where they can completely disconnect or disengage with the colonial criminal states or their financial institutions. As I have explained before, the Western colonial criminal states continue to hold a lot of power, and for India, in order to prepare itself to clean or detoxify the global system, it first needs to gain more strength and at times even unwillingly enter into a partnership with them. But as the voice of the global South, oppressed, colonized and marginalized, India shouldn't forget its mission when it strategically engages with the West. Back in 2020, in this video, I said that India needs its own version of HSBC and Citibank, its own version of S&P and Moody's, its own version of KPMG and PwC, its own international social media platforms, its own version of the BBC and CNN, its own version of the Oscar and the Nobel, its own highly reputed scientific journals and academic institutions, its own global think tanks which can influence the investors' sentiment and international policymaking, and its own international human rights bodies. And of course, it will eventually need a permanent seat on the UNSC. And remember, when I say India's own version, it means something that is based on Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam and something that is totally opposite to the West's colonial or neo-colonial interests. So yes, India has arrived on the global stage with a lot of hope and promise. But will it continue to deliver? See you again.